Okay. Moving on, we have now Cyril Perducat. Just make sure I'm not getting the order. Yes, Cyril is up next. Cyril is an engineer like Syed and has spent, like Suran, his entire career in one company, which is Schneider Electric. And this is also our chance to look at a European multinational. I mean, we've talked so far about US multinationals, but now we have the opportunity to look at a European multinational. And the other interesting thing I think about this next conversation is going to be its focus on digitization and the Internet of Things. So this is an issue that has come up in some of the previous presentations, how important digital is in Asia, how extensively it's being applied, some of the innovative products and services that are coming out because of this digital, the extensive digitization in Asia Pacific. I'm not sure if Cyril is going to necessarily connect only to Asia Pacific, but he's certainly going to bring us into this very interesting issue and a very important trend that we haven't talked about much so far. Cyril, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so my name is Cyril Perducat, and I'm the head of IoT for Schneider Electric globally. For those of you that maybe are not familiar with Schneider Electric, I will do a quick introduction a bit later and explain what we are doing. I have a special relationship with emerging markets and Asia Pacific. When I just graduated from an engineering school in the early 90s, my first job was in China. So I started in China in the early 90s, which was really, when you consider the post-Tiananmen period in China, was really where a lot of multinationals were starting to think about reinvesting in China, were starting to develop business. When I moved to China, end of 94, Schneider Electric had 300 employees in China, which were the outcome of joint ventures that we did in the 80s. Now Schneider Electric has 32,000 employees and 28 factories. And it has been a cornerstone of our growth and development. So the past 15 years of Schneider Electric have been a lot about globalization. It has been the center of our strategy, and the new center of our strategy is digitization. So it's a good transition to see how we developed in the past 10, 15 years with globalization, and we are going to expand this right now with digitization. That is the core pillar of our strategy. I lived in China for 10 years in two periods. I had different responsibilities in this country. I created a new business for Schneider Electric in China in industrial automation from scratch. At this time, it was a bit adventurous, so I learned a lot. We can still learn things in schools. This was discussed earlier, but practical experience in a bit of extreme environment is also very useful. So I will advise a blend of both. I came back in the middle, spent a bit of time in France, went back to China for a second type of job. In this second type of job, I was in charge of strategy, M&A, business development for Schneider Electric in China. Did another 5 years, Shanghai, Beijing, came back to Germany, and then went to Singapore. So when I was in Singapore for 5 years, I developed the R&D of the industrial automation business for Schneider Electric in China, in India, and in Singapore. So I developed a 600, 800 team, mostly around software and electronics in those three countries, to rebalance our R&D footprint in those countries. So this is the exposure I had in Asia and emerging market. When you say emerging market, by the way, this makes me a bit uncomfortable. There are different dimensions in those countries where we could say, okay, there are dimensions of social aspects, protections, development that might be emerging or might not be at the level we have in the Western economies. But when I look at innovation, technology, and many aspects, this is beyond emerge. This is a reality, and this is a gigantic market. And if we look at the topic, which is the topic of the day, if I look at IoT and the Internet of Things in general, the number one area in terms of investment is Asia Pacific today. It's considered to be almost 50% of the global market. and it's driven by manufacturing and utilities. And when you look at a company like Schneider Electric, our business is simple in terms of macroeconomics. Our business is influenced. We are in energy management and automation, and our business is affected by infrastructure investment, manufacturing investment, and real estate investment. So an economy like Asia Pacific in general is absolutely fundamental to our business. Today, if we look at our country portfolio, China is our number 2 country. The number 1 country is the US, for historical reason, for the size that we have historically in the US. So it will remain for the coming years still the number 1 market because of the initial scale that we have, but per growth, China ultimately will overcome the size of the US. This is inevitability. It's just a matter of when. It's not a matter of if it's going to happen. It's related to the population, the nature of the investment, all the different macroeconomic factors for that country. India is now our number 3 country. We just acquired a big part of Larsen & Toubro industrial automation and electrical distribution business. Now India is our number 3 country. Not very far from India, probably 4 or 5 is Russia. So our portfolio has completely shifted globally. So we are a French public listed company with the vast majority of our investors being based in the US or in the Anglo-Saxon world in general, with a business that is growing in Asia Pacific. It was growing a bit more in South America in the past years, but with the difficulties in Brazil, this has affected our business in this area. But we see different countries in South America, Argentina, Colombia, which is the fastest growing in the area. We see many different factors and some industrial sectors, mining, different infrastructure projects have a good influence in those businesses. And you can see that EMEA in this chart is a bit lower in all this. It remains a very attractive market for us. It remains a growing market. It remains a healthy market in terms of price level, market dynamic. But what is putting our business is overall the emerging economies in general. If we look at another dimensions, when I look at many things where we are involved, and I think this statement is very important, China, because of the size as a single market, represents economic of scales for any company. So any Chinese companies that start a business on anything in China has natural economic of scales. They don't need to go across the multiple variable regulations we can find in Europe, where we need to align different countries on everything. So they started in solar. They are starting in electrical vehicle. They will dominate the electrical vehicle market. This is inevitability as well, because of the economics of scale. The Chinese investors have purchased for the next 10 years the majority of the cobalt supply in the world, which is in Africa, in Congo, because they want to secure the supply of cobalt for making batteries for electrical vehicle. So when we say emerging, I'm struggling with the concept of emerging. This is beyond emerging. This is where is the growth of the economy. I go back to Asia probably 4 or 5 times a year. I'm amazed by the contrast with the Western economies. I see countries that are completely looking at their future. Infrastructures are modern, schools are modern, populations are completely forward-looking. Where I see many countries in the Western economy, France is one of them, US is kind of one of them, that are more looking about what was good in their past than what are the opportunities in the future. And this contrast is striking. When I come back after 2 or 3 weeks in those countries and I look at what is happening, this is striking me all the time. And I think we have to realize that altogether. And I think this overall trend of the dynamic of the business and IoT is going to continue. And there is a natural growth that comes from the macroeconomy, but I will add to this the innovation-based economy. China, as a country, and I think that's the case for India, that's the case for several economies, but China is a striking one, has decided that its future growth will be centered on innovation, because China needs to derive more of its economic growth from organic developments when historically, probably when I started 20 years ago, there was a lot of the economy in China that was accelerated by foreign direct investment and export. But China, in the China 2025 plan and others, is looking at seeing innovation as the core pillar of economic growth. And when you look at the development, the education, the schools, I remember a statistic that is not on my slide that I saw some years ago. If you take the percentage of students that are graduating with honors in China plus India, so just the top 10-15% of the people graduating in China and India, this segment is bigger in number than the overall number of people graduating in the Western economies. So not only there is a willingness to invest and to grow and to do an innovation-based economy, but there is a population and there is a talent to support that growth. So it's very important for a company like Schneider Electric to be present there. We are not present in Asia Pacific for cost anymore. We are present in Asia Pacific for talents, and we are present in Asia Pacific for the growth that the market represents for us. I think 7 years ago, our CEO and part of the executive committee moved to Hong Kong. So we are a French public listed company with investors in the US, growth in Asia Pacific, and 1/3 of the executive committee based in Hong Kong. And no, we don't have a central location that is in the Western world anymore. We have 3 management hubs, one in Boston, in this area, that's why I'm based here, one in Europe, and one in Asia Pacific based in Hong Kong, because we want to be close to the talents, we want to be close to the market. So this has had a lot of impact on the way we organize the company in order to be able to capture those opportunities, but not as an opportunity of reducing our cost, like it was probably 20 years ago, but really as an opportunity to capture the market in terms of economic growth and talent base for our business in general. Moving forward, when we look at the evolution that is happening in those markets, it's very important for us to, and this has been said in previous presentations, it's very important for us to be close to customer needs. And the particularity of our business is that some elements of our business are very global by nature. If you look at a business like process automation, the automation that is used in a refinery, fundamentally, whether you are in the US, in the Middle East, or you are in China, the core technology is the same. So the difference will be the way we market it, the way we support it, the local talents and expertise that we are able to build in those countries so we can support the technology. But on the other extreme of the scope of our business, if you take the residential market or whatever is related to real estate, there is a very strong local dimensions because of norms, standards, or habits. I think electrical distribution in homes is a good thing. When you buy a home in the US, well, it's the fit out of the electrical installation, lighting systems, plug, socket, switch is pretty much done. It has been selected either by you or by your contractor. In China, when somebody buys an apartment, it's the lowest cost possible components because people buying a home will want to choose premium stuff to put in their home. So this creates a totally different market. The difference here is that in the market in the US, our primary customers will be the contractors. So they will be looking at products that are easy to install and that are easy to find on the market and that are easily supported. But in China, our primary customers are the consumers. So they will look at buying the same products through retail channels. They will look at a brand that has a certain level of visibility. They will want customization. They will want design. But the function is the same. So we have this spectrum of business across Schneider Electric, and we are really looking at this in different ways. All our products are becoming digital. So everything that we do in whatever market we address, whatever it is, residential, industrial, infrastructure, utilities, everything that we do becomes connected. Everything that we do becomes a source of information, a source of data that transform into insight that are either used to create new customer experience, residential market, or that are used in order to improve manufacturing efficiency and sustainability in other sectors. But everything becomes connected. And what is fascinating with a market like Asia and what is happening in China is the dynamic of the investment in that space, so the willingness to be pioneer, to be innovating. Yes, there are in the Western world some giant companies. We work with some of them, Amazon, Google, Microsoft are our partners, but there are companies that are more than emerging in Asia. If you look at Huawei, if you look at Tencent, if you look at some of those other players, they are sometimes not well-known giants that have already a scale that is absolutely outstanding. I was with Huawei recently in Shenzhen. Their firepower in terms of R&D is just outstanding. They can take the R&D on any topic and make a breakthrough because they have the scale. So I really want to repeat this aspect. China means economics of scale. Any company that starts anything in China has naturally economics of scale, which is fascinating. And this happened in the past for solar. This is happening today for electrical vehicle. The largest AI startup in the world focused on facial recognition since time is China-based. They just raised $650 million, which is one of the biggest fundraise this year on AI. And yes, of course, it comes from regulation. Facial recognition is used in security systems. So there is a market context that makes this possible. But because of these volumes, they will naturally have a competitive edge on facial recognition application of AI that no other player can match in the foreseeable future because of economics of scale. So if I go back a little bit to Schneider Electric and how we are positioned to make a summary, so we have in average 5% of our revenue devoted to R&D on the 24.7 billion revenue. It really depends on the sectors. So we have a range from lower single-digit % to more electronic software-based business. We are in the range of 10 to 20% of R&D. So I'm more on the software side today. 41% of our revenue is what is considered as new economies or emerging economies, even if the definition of that is not always easy. Okay, well, I was saying, should we consider today China as an emerging economy? That's a bit difficult. We have a very balanced portfolio. As I mentioned, our growth in the past and the core of our strategy for the last 15 years has been globalization, has been creating the most global company in our field. And we are recognized as the most global company, global in terms of management structure, global in terms of local presence, global in terms of talent outreach. And this is what we have achieved, and that's a good summary. With today, well, just as of the figures of 2017, Asia Pacific being our bigger region, the biggest region, okay, which is really striking. We are in energy management and industrial automation. So energy management spans across the spectrum of electrical distribution. So this is either low voltage, which is what you find in your home or in commercial buildings, medium voltage, which is more at the infrastructure level, but also secure power, which is what you will find in data centers, in hospitals, so all applications that ensure the continuous guaranteed supply of electricity for mission-critical applications, and industrial automation in general term, and automation spans our portfolio, automation in buildings, so this building, HVAC system, monitoring, lighting, probably has either the technology of Schneider Electric or the technology of one of our competitors. And we categorize that as energy management because in this type of facility, what our customer wants typically is comfort with minimal cost and minimum environmental impact. And this is a balance of all those different dimensions that requires more and more data in order to achieve that goal. So in the past, we would have had different systems that were independent, security, lighting, electricity, HVAC management, all will have been different systems, heterogeneous, sometimes provided by different companies. Now we integrate this into single solutions around the umbrella that we call Ecostructure. I come back on this after, because our customers, and that's where IoT comes core to our technology, want a balance of contradicting factors in an optimization system. And in general, all across the spectrum of our portfolio, they want better performance or better productivity, better comfort or better safety, and lowest environmental impact. And the balance of this can be achieved only because you interrelate systems, inside system, outside systems, correlate data, transform data into information, transform information into insights. And that's the core of our strategy, and that's the core of what we do. And we summarize this in two simple statements. The motto of Schneider Electric is life is on. This is the way we brand ourselves, life is on. And we believe that life is on when life is powered. In many, many aspects of life, the supply of energy in general is critical, okay? It's critical on the performance aspect, so you can think about data centers, buildings, and everything, but it's also critical for the development. When we help a country like India or Nigeria to bring electricity in a remote village because we are able to have a solar-powered installation that replace diesel generators, will allow to have equipment that are easier to maintain or that could be remotely maintained compared to a diesel generator that is going to break, will never have the right spare parts, is polluting the environment. And powering those villages means education, means healthcare, means bringing things that people don't have today. And there is more than 1 billion people today in the world that still have no access to electricity. And even more than that have access to electricity only in random time during the day. Not having electricity in the evening, it means that when your child comes back from school, he cannot do his homework. So bringing electricity means a huge difference. So that's a very important aspect. Not only just the modern part of it, a critical supply of electricity in the operating room of an hospital, but also this second part that is related to the development. And then digital, because more and more of those complex systems to power the world require data and information to provide this in an optimum way. If we are not able to improve, as we do today, the energy efficiency of data centers, we work with different companies like Microsoft or other companies operating large data centers. It is a gigantic source of consumption of energy. But they all want to have their data centers powered by renewable. So you can imagine solar panel on the roof. You can imagine recycling the heat of servers and do cogeneration of electricity. You can imagine many different things. Because if we are not taking care of how this development of new things consume energy in a better way, then the IT sector itself is going to be 60 or 70% of the energy consumption of the world in the coming years. Not cars, not planes, not all this, but IT, because of the intensity of electricity that needs the compute power that we are using today in any kind of modern infrastructure or facility. So digital is our second pillar for that reason, because digital goes with power. We cannot power the world efficiently without digital at its core. And the way we have captured this in a strategy is what we call Ecostructure. So Ecostructure is how we integrate the different pieces in our portfolio in order to solve those problems that I have described for the world. In general, our portfolio combines different layers of capabilities. Every product that we are doing, so for those of you that are familiar with the industrial world, whatever is industrial automation is connected on-premise. Tomorrow it's connected, or today it's connected on the cloud, but that's the same for a building. More and more of those buildings will remotely process data in order to make recommendation of maintenance to operators of buildings, for example. So there are many things at the level. Those products that we had in the past that were just doing a function now are doing a function and are a source of information. Those source of information can be either processed locally in the device itself. So you take variable speed drives that control a motor. In the past, it was just controlling the motor. Today, it processes informations, it optimizes pump curves, for example, so that pumping activity, depending on environmental factors, will minimize the energy consumption in the pump. Or it can push those data somewhere else in the architecture, so another piece of equipment will consume this information to improve itself in its own dynamic. So there is a whole dynamic of data around this. We have an edge control capability, so because you have heard about the edge on an IT sense, every of those different buildings, infrastructure, facility, aggregate data at the edge, process data at the edge for mission critical needs, and then what is not mission critical, but what is related to optimization, then it is pushed somewhere else in the cloud or somewhere else, so that it could be consumed in application to perform different optimization tasks or to inform users, empower users to make the right decisions all together in their process. So we tackle, as I mentioned, the building market, the data center market, the industry market, and the infrastructure market. You can imagine that in the perspective of the emerging market economies, those 4 sectors, as I mentioned before, are core to our growth. So when we develop those solutions, every time we have a customer-centric process to invent a new offer, we embark targeted countries from the emerging economies in the process, or customers that have presence in those countries and they want to develop some specific activities in those countries. So we can build the solutions that are also adapted to those markets. And adapted means, as I said earlier, it means different things. It could be adapted on the way it is supported and operated, or adapted on the way it is designed, or a combination of both. Sorry, I'll go accelerate because I've spoken a lot. So when we look at our presence as a result of all of those different actions, we are in those different sectors: oil and gas, mining, mineral and metals, food and bev, and all the others that you can see here. We have a strong relationship with many different players in those fields. You can note here that, for example, we power 26,000 water and wastewater installations in 120 countries. This is one of the typical utility sectors that not only needs a good infrastructure but needs optimization. We can use software applied to a water network to compare the nominal pattern of the network with the actual pattern and detect that there is a leak somewhere in the installation. You have to, if you take emerging economies, I remember a stat about Indonesia, more than 35% of the water is lost in the infrastructure. And it's a combination of theft and leaks. For the ability for utilities to be able to detect this and to originate those different problems will help them to either preserve a precious resource or avoid theft in some part of the architecture. And that's very similar for electricity in many different countries. 1 billion buildings. This is really one of our top sectors. So 1 million buildings, and all those buildings are becoming connected. So you can imagine what we can do with all the data in a building in terms of improving comfort, utilization, and different things. We do workplace efficiency solutions combined with energy management, optimizing the layout, adapting the temperature in a meeting room depending on the number of people inside. So there are many different things that are possible. And as I mentioned, one of the important sectors for us is data centers. So we are the leader in that space for the infrastructure part. In a data center, we provide everything except the concrete to build it and the servers. But everything else, rack, coolings, infrastructures, electrical distribution, in order to power the data center and keep it up and running, is provided by Schneider Electric. As an example, we worked in China, and this is almost my last slide. We worked in China with a company called Raytheon, and optimizing the process of manufacturing. So this is food and beverage industry, optimizing the process, and we were able to get return of investments that are lower than a year. And it's interesting also in those economies because they do have capital, but they have a lot of projects. So anything that optimize the use of capital allows them to free capital for expansion. So that's probably a different set of constraints that what we will find in other economies, but that's very important. And the other dimension in an economy like China is that environmental regulations are quite strict because a country like China knows that this is make or break for their development. So lowering emission, lowering pollutions is critical. If China had the same number of cars with the same level of average consumption that the U.S., China only will consume all the oil and gas produced in the world, which is obviously not sustainable. So that's why they are looking at electrical vehicles. That's why they are looking at all alternatives, because they know they cannot source all the oil in the world. So that's a fundamental parameter. It's a roadblock of growth. So it's not just ethical. It's not just comfort of the citizen. It is, but it is also a roadblock of the growth. So those technologies need to bring the innovation that will unlock and continue to unlock the potential growth in China. And my very last slide. So I've spoken a lot about China. There are 3 things that we do on top of what I have mentioned in China. So we do a lot of co-innovation. We are developing networks of partnership. I think it's a world where we need to be open to partnership, and we have a strong presence and visibility in China as a company and as a brand, which allows us to bring partnership. We have created a startup investment fund for IoT innovation dedicated for China, with a team in China and a fund allocation specific to China. And we work a lot with different government authorities in order to find the right balance in terms of norms and standards and have the right government influence policy so that we can, of course, respect local regulation, but influence them in the interest of the business and the growth of those economies. And that's it.
Thank you.
Hi. So I was wondering if you've had any kind of issues with these R&D startups that you've had in China with their IoT solutions and the kind of data and backdoor security issues that they have with the government and having to give data to them when you guys are securing like mission critical things for hospitals or these huge data centers that basically make the world work.
So in general, the regulations in China are evolving in a way that is extremely strict. Some of you have heard about the Great Firewall, so the challenge and the restriction in moving data out from outside and inside China. And now the regulation is evolving even in a stricter way, whereas that will force every player on the Chinese market not only to locate data in China, but that anybody that manipulates data will need to be located in China as well. So this is going to evolve and kind of create China as an island in all this. So we will, as a company, have to adapt to this. This is not fundamentally from all other business. When we support an electrical installation system, we have resources in China. So this is adapting the same principle of being very close to our customers in a country like China. We don't do export to China anymore. We produce in China. I mentioned we have 28 factories. They all serve the Chinese market. We don't export much outside. But regulations, that's why this aspect of having ongoing discussion with the governments, having positive relationship with the governments, we need to find a balance on what is good for the business versus what is good for the government. But right now, it's evolving in a very strict way in China.
Hi, my name is Jenju from Suffolk University, a faculty in the marketing department there. My question's on the balance your company take to, on one side, the government's driving the more energy, cleaner energy, renewable energy, but on the other side, those, let's say, build a smart city or factory could be expensive. Mm-hmm. So far, by your observations, that mostly the multinational companies are taking the lead. How about the local companies' reaction to those kind of IoT or smart buildings?
So first, I'm not sure that only multinational companies are taking the lead. There are many different dimensions where local companies have a very strong dynamic and very good solutions, and they are respected competitors that we have. It's true that a lot of multinational companies have taken the very upper part of the market, the premium part, which is a very dangerous positioning. Just to be on the premium part because you are kind of eaten by below. So we have adapted in some of our offers this strategy. So we have created what we call a medium and a minimum offer. So finding a better optimum of features versus cost so that we can cover the market with different offers and make our solution affordable for all the different segments. When you look at a country like China, China is not an homogeneous market. Shanghai is probably more modern than many places in the US, versus you will have some places in China, when you travel there, you are probably like 50 years ago. So it's not an homogeneous market. So a company that has presence in China, whatever we speak about digital or non-digital business, whenever if everything becomes digital, have to adapt to that diversity. And when we do customer-centric studies, we are not looking at the technology only. We are also looking at what is the best channel to sell and support those offers, and what is the level of price points that we need to have. There is no point to have something for energy management that can be only sold in Shanghai. We need to have something that will cater the needs of commercial building in second-tier or third-tier cities in China as well, because this is where is the bulk of the market. China is a good representation of what we call the long tail. Some people will tend to see the 5 largest cities in China as the bulk of the market, but the reality is the opportunity of the market is in the long tail. I think in China there are something like 500 cities that have more than 1 million inhabitants or something like that. So we need to look at this. It's a very significant long term.
Hi, my name is Vitaly Vexler. I'm a CEO of Beyond Borders Investment Strategies. And I would like to ask you a question about sustainability of your competitive advantages in China. You gave us a very interesting statistic about a number of graduates, top-notch graduates in technology. And you are developing and producing many of your systems with Chinese partners. What stops them from learning your trade secrets and then just competing against you, not only in China, but outside of China? Thank you so much.
So that's the $1 billion question. And I think every multinational company is facing this one. I think the only sustainable competitive advantage, in my view, is innovation. The ability to continue to innovate and to be perceived as an innovative company is the only sustainable competitive advantage. Anything that we do today, I mentioned companies that have a lot of firepower, unless you protect this with a massive amount of patents, which in many areas, those are difficult patents to sustain. You know, when you are in software, in digital, it's very difficult. Patentability is difficult. The only opportunity is to be ahead. But that's a challenge. There are often debates, not just in Schneider Electric, but with other companies that I know that are in China about sustainability in the long run. But then if we were building our business today considering that we will collapse in China, we will not go very far. So we consider that we can sustain a competitive advantage by being as close as possible in China as a Chinese company. In terms of talent outreach, in terms of local innovation capabilities, in terms of local partnerships. And we believe so far this has been sustainable because we have found the right level of localization in China. I get a lot of questions about localization in China in general. We have a good mix in China of Chinese leadership blended with the best experts of different parts of the organization that are working in China for a period of time because they bring this expertise, but they also bring back where they come from the expertise of the Chinese market to other part of the organization. Half of the executive committee of Schneider Electric, or more than half, have worked in China and lived in China at one point of their career. When I mentioned when I started in China, the boss I had at this time is now the CEO of Schneider Electric. So understanding the market, maintaining this as a source of talent, maintaining a competitive advantage on innovation for me is key. Then there is a challenge that, as I mentioned, China, economics of scale. So any companies that emerge out of China can nuke any market. This has been done in the past with solar panels, for example. This is a good example of a market that has been pretty much lowered down very quickly, but that's an example. There are other examples where there is a good balance. And I also believe that Chinese companies, if they want to expand across the world, a balance will need to be found on the geopolitical and macroeconomic point of view, because not everything can be manufactured in China, not everything can be innovated in China. That's the balance of globalization. At the same time, when I look at topic you were mentioning data, we see a trend of stronger localization on some specific markets. So I think we will have to become, moving forward, more Chinese in China than we were until now. But this will just be reinforcing a pattern that we have already today. And that will be the same for India, that will be the same for Russia. We will need to be more strongly local than global. So I would say multi-local instead of global.
Thank you, Cyril. Thank you. Terrific.